A bobcat was born with a rare bone disease that left his legs weak and made survival in the wild impossible, forcing him to live a quiet, isolated life in a protected enclosure. Everything changed when Milo, a gentle white Labrador, wandered into the enclosure and began visiting him every day, calmly approaching the shy bobcat and encouraging him to interact. Predator met pup, and something ancient stirred between them. Recognition, kinship, hope. But when they were forced to separate, the cost was more than emotional. It was life-threatening. What happens when survival depends not on medicine, but on love? Stay with us. This is the story of a bond so powerful, it rewrote the rules of nature. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The Oklahoma sun has a specific way of hitting the dust in late autumn. It turns the flat, sprawling landscape into a canvas of burnt orange and pale gold, a light that is unforgivingly clear. At the Heartland Wildlife Sanctuary, this clarity often revealed things that were hard to look at. It illuminated the scars on rescued coyotes, the broken wings of hawks that would never fly again, and, in a quiet enclosure near the main house, the struggle of a creature named Bone Digger. Bone Digger was a bobcat, but he moved unlike any wild cat should. In the wild, a bobcat is liquid shadow, a master of ambush, capable of leaping 10 feet in a single bound, a ghost in the underbrush. Bone Digger was none of these things. Born with a congenital metabolic bone disease, a form of osteodystrophy, his skeleton was a traitor to his spirit. His bones were brittle, bowing under the weight of his own body. Gravity for him was not a constant. It was an adversary. Elias, the sanctuary's headkeeper, a man whose face was etched with the same weathering lines as the land he tended, watched the young cat from the perimeter. Elias had spent 40 years rehabilitating American wildlife. He knew the distinct sharp smell of a fox den and the chattering call of a distressed raccoon. But Bone Digger was different. "He's struggling today," observed Sarah, a younger veterinary technician who stood beside Elias, clutching a clipboard against her chest. "His gait is stiffer than usual. The damp air is getting to his joints." Elias nodded, his eyes fixed on the tawny spotted coat moving slowly through the tall grass. "It's not just the joints, Sarah. Look at his eyes. It's the isolation. A bobcat is solitary by nature, yes, but they are also creatures of stimulation. He can't hunt. He can't climb. He is a prisoner in his own body." The tragedy of Bone Digger was that he possessed the fierce, intelligent mind of an apex predator trapped in a fragile vessel. He would see a butterfly flutter past and his muscles would bunch to pounce, only to spasm in weakness. He would chirp, a bird-like sound bobcats make, but there was no one to answer. He was effectively an orphan of circumstance, too wild for a living room, too broken for the forest. The sanctuary staff did their best. They provided enrichment, scented logs, hidden treats, feather toys. But Bone Digger's world was shrinking. He spent hours lying in the corner of his enclosure, chin resting on his paws, watching the horizon with a gaze that seemed to hold an ancient, heavy sadness. He was failing to thrive, a clinical term that meant he was slowly giving up on the business of being alive. The change did not come from a medical breakthrough or a new diet plan. It came on 4 legs, wagging a tail that acted as a metronome for pure, unadulterated joy. Milo was a Labrador mix, a rescue himself, who lived on the sanctuary grounds as a companion animal for the staff. Milo was everything Bone Digger was not. Clumsy, exuberant, sturdy, and blindly optimistic. He was a creature of sunshine, whereas Bone Digger was a creature of twilight. It happened on a Tuesday, during the routine cleaning of the outer perimeter. The gate to the walkway between the staff quarters and the specialized enclosures had been left unlatched for a mere second. Milo, sniffing the wind, trotted through. Elias, spotting the dog heading toward the Bobcat's heavy wire fence, felt his heart hammer against his ribs. "Milo, no!" he shouted, dropping his rake. In the world of wildlife rehabilitation, mixing species is a violation of the cardinal rules. Predator and domestic prey drive do not mix. A bobcat, even a disabled one, possesses jaws powerful enough to crush the vertebrae of a small deer. A dog, curious and naive, could trigger a defensive strike that would end in tragedy. But before Elias could reach them, Milo had already reached the mesh. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply sat down, his cream-colored fur stark against the rusty dirt, and shoved his wet nose through the chain-link diamond. Inside, Bone Digger froze. The tufts of fur on his ears twitched. His yellow-green eyes widened, the pupils dilating. He had never been this close to another animal since his littermates had been separated from him. Instinct screamed at him to hide or to strike. Bone Digger hissed, a low, guttural sound like steam escaping a pipe. Milo didn't flinch. He whined softly, a high-pitched sound of invitation, and lowered his front paws into a playbow, his tail thumping the dirt. Thud, thud, thud. Bone Digger tilted his head. The aggression in his posture melted into confusion. He hobbled forward, his movements jerky and uneven. He stopped inches from the wire, sniffing the air. The scent of the dog, earthy, musky, and warm, flooded his senses. Tentatively, the bobcat reached out a paw. Instead of unsheathing his claws to swipe, he kept them retracted. He batted gently at the wire. Milo licked the wire in return. Elias, who had stopped 10 feet away, watched in stunned silence. He signaled for Sarah to stay back. They were witnessing a conversation in a language older than words. It was curiosity overcoming fear. It was the recognition of one lonely soul by another. "Let them be," Elias whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Just for a minute." That minute turned into an hour. The hour turned into a daily ritual. And eventually, after weeks of careful introduction through the fence, the decision was made to open the gate. The first time Milo stepped fully into Bone Digger's enclosure, the entire sanctuary staff held their breath. They had tranquilizer darts ready. They had catch poles. They were prepared for blood. Instead, they got a love story. Milo trotted in, carrying a rubber toy in his mouth. He dropped it at Bone Digger's crippled feet. The bobcat sniffed it, then looked up at the dog. With a sudden burst of energy that Elias hadn't seen in months, Bone Digger rubbed his cheek against Milo's neck, a sign of claiming, of affection, of family. Milo responded by flopping onto his side, exposing his belly, the ultimate sign of trust. Bone Digger accepted the offer. He began to groom the dog, his rough sandpaper tongue working through the Labrador's thick fur, cleaning his ears, his face, his neck. Milo closed his eyes and sighed, leaning into the grooming with a blissed-out expression. From that day forward, they were inseparable. The transformation in Bone Digger was nothing short of miraculous. The failure to thrive diagnosis evaporated. Having Milo around changed the bobcat's physiology. To keep up with the dog, Bone Digger moved more. He forced his muscles to work, strengthening the supportive tissue around his brittle bones. He ate with gusto, competing playfully with Milo for the best spots in the sun. They became a fixture of the sanctuary, a living fable. Visitors would stand by the enclosure fence, hushed and teary-eyed, watching the pair. They would see the 50-pound wildcat curled up inside the curve of the 80-pound dog's stomach, asleep. They would see them wrestling, Bone Digger wrapping his front paws around Milo's head while gently mouthing his ears, never breaking the skin. "It defies biology," a visiting zoologist once told Elias, shaking his head as he watched Milo chase a butterfly while Bone Digger watched, chuffing in amusement. Bobcats are hardwired for solitude. They are territorial. This is an anomaly. "It's not an anomaly," Elias corrected him gently. "It's a necessity. We define them by their species. They define themselves by their need for connection. Bone Digger knows he is broken. Milo makes him feel whole." For 5 years, this was the reality. The seasons cycled. The scorching Oklahoma summers where the two would pant in the shade of a scrub oak, and the biting winters where they formed a literal pile of fur to share body heat. They grew older together. Milo's muzzle began to gray. Bone Digger's movements became slightly slower, but the bond remained the iron core of their lives. Then came the clipboards. The trouble began with a restructuring of the sanctuary's oversight committee. New regulations were passed regarding the handling of Class 1 wildlife. Insurance premiums were skyrocketing. Liability was the new buzzword. A safety inspector named Mr. Henderson arrived in late October. He was a man who saw the world in black and white, in spreadsheets and risk assessments. He walked the grounds with Elias, ticking boxes on a tablet. When they reached Bone Digger's enclosure, the scene was idyllic. The bobcat was kneading Milo's back like a giant kitten making biscuits. Henderson stopped. He frowned. He tapped the screen of his tablet aggressively. "What is a domestic canine doing in with a lynx rufus?" Henderson asked, his voice devoid of wonder. "That's Milo and Bone Digger," Elias said, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. "They've lived together for 5 years. They are bonded." "It's a liability nightmare," Henderson stated flatly. "If that cat turns, and it is a wild animal regardless of its disability, it kills the dog. We get sued by animal welfare. If the dog carries a pathogen, the cat gets sick. We lose our accreditation. It's a violation of Section 4, Paragraph C of the containment protocols." "You don't understand," Elias argued, his voice rising. "This isn't just a containment issue. This is a quality of life issue. The bobcat cannot survive psychologically without the dog. They are a pair." "Nature doesn't have pairs like this," Henderson scoffed. "Separate them, immediately. Or I write you up for a critical violation, and you lose your state funding." The threat was existential. Without state funding, the sanctuary would close. All the animals, hundreds of them, would be displaced or euthanized. Elias looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at the ground, tears welling in her eyes. They had no choice. The separation was efficient and clinical. Milo was let out on a leash, his tail wagging, thinking he was going for a walk. He was moved to the domestic kennel run on the other side of the property, a solid half-mile away. Bone Digger watched him go. He stood at the fence, his crippled legs trembling, and let out a sound that haunted Elias that night. A long, rising scream that was half meow, half howl. The decline was not gradual this time. It was a cliff. The first day, Bone Digger paced the fence line until his paws were raw. He refused to look at the keepers. By the third day, the pacing stopped. He retreated to the small wooden shelter box in the back of his enclosure. He refused to come out. Sarah brought his favorite food, raw chicken necks and high-quality beef. She tried to entice him with sense. She sat by the enclosure and read to him. But Bone Digger simply stared at the back wall of his den. His eyes, once bright with the reflection of Milo's antics, had gone dull and flat. "He's not eating," Sarah reported on day 5, her voice trembling. "He hasn't taken a bite in 72 hours. He's dehydrated." Elias went to see for himself. He entered the enclosure, something he rarely did with the adult cats. But Bone Digger didn't even acknowledge his presence. The bobcat lay on his side, his breathing shallow. His ribs were already beginning to show through his coat. The metabolic bone disease, always lurking in the background, seized the opportunity. Without movement, his joints stiffened. Without food, his energy crashed. But it wasn't just the bobcat. Over at the kennels, Milo was destroying himself. The usually quiet Labrador was barking incessantly, a hoarse, rhythmic panic. He was clawing at the chain-link fence, tearing his nails until they bled. He wouldn't play with the other dogs. He wouldn't eat his kibble. He spent his time facing the direction of the bobcat's enclosure, whining low in his throat. "We are killing them," Elias told the sanctuary director on the 7th day. "We are watching them die of broken hearts, and we're noting it on a clipboard as compliance." The director, a stern woman named Martha, who usually sided with the regulations, looked at the daily health reports. Bone Digger's weight had dropped by 15%. His organ function was showing signs of stress. "The inspector comes back in a month," Martha said, her voice quiet. "If the animal is dead by then, we didn't save anything, did we?" "He won't last a month," Elias said. "He won't last the week." That evening, a storm rolled in over the plains. Thunder rattled the windows of the veterinary clinic. Bone Digger dragged himself out of his box and lay in the mud, the rain soaking his fur. He looked like a discarded rag. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, Elias thought the cat was preparing to let go. The decision was made at 2 a.m. Elias couldn't sleep. The image of the dying bobcat was burned into his retinas. He called Sarah. "Meet me at the kennels," he said. "I don't care about the state funding. I'm not being a pallbearer for a bobcat that died of loneliness." They fetched Milo. The dog was lethargic, curling in the corner of his run. But the moment, the very second, Elias clicked the leash onto his collar, Milo's ears perked up. He seemed to sense the intention. As they walked him across the dark, rain-slicked grounds, Milo began to pull. He knew where he was going. They reached the enclosure. The rain was falling in sheets now. Elias unlocked the double-gate safety system. "Go on, boy," Elias whispered, unclipping the leash. Milo didn't run. He moved with a desperate, focused intensity. He trotted into the enclosure, ignoring the mud, ignoring the thunder. He went straight to the lump of wet fur lying in the center of the pen. Bone Digger didn't move at first. He was deep in the lethargy that precedes death. Milo lowered his head. He began to lick the rain off Bone Digger's face. He whined, nudging the bobcat's shoulder with his wet nose. "Get up. I'm here. Get up." Slowly, agonizingly, Bone Digger opened his eyes. He blinked, fighting the blur of exhaustion. He saw the white shape in the darkness. He smelled the familiar scent of wet dog and home. The transformation was visceral. It was as if an electrical current had been reconnected. Bone Digger let out a soft, shaky chirp. He lifted his head. Then, summoning strength that shouldn't have been there, he pushed himself up on his front legs. He rubbed his face deeply into Milo's neck, burying his nose in the dog's fur, inhaling the life force of his friend. Milo lay down around him, curling his body to shield the shivering cat from the wind. He licked the top of Bone Digger's head rhythmically, soothingly. Within 10 minutes, Bone Digger stood up. He was shaky, yes, but he stood. He walked to the food bowl that had sat untouched for 2 days. He took a bite, then another. He looked back at Milo to ensure he was still there. Milo thumped his tail. Bone Digger ate the entire bowl. When the sun rose the next morning, breaking through the storm clouds to bathe the sanctuary in a warm, clean light, Elias found them. They were asleep on the high wooden platform, dry and intertwined. Bone Digger's head was resting on Milo's flank. The bobcat was purring, a sound so deep and rumbling it could be felt through the wood of the platform. The inspector, Mr. Henderson, returned 3 weeks later, earlier than expected. He had his tablet ready. He marched to the enclosure, expecting to see a solitary bobcat or an empty cage. He stopped. He stared. Bone Digger was not just alive. He was thriving. His coat was glossy. He was wrestling with Milo, batting at the dog's tail while Milo pretended to be ferocious. "I told you to separate them," Henderson said, though his voice lacked its previous conviction. He was looking at the data chart Sarah had handed him. "Look at the blood work," Sarah said, pointing to the columns. "This is the week they were separated." She pointed to the plummeting cortisol levels, the spiking kidney stress markers. "And this is the day we put them back together." The data was undeniable. But then, Elias handed Henderson a second file. This was the twist that no one had seen coming, not even the staff, until the vet had run a full workup on Milo the day after the reunion. "It wasn't just the cat, Mr. Henderson," Elias said softly. "Look at the dog's heart monitor." Henderson squinted at the EKG strips. Milo, the happy-go-lucky Labrador, had a previously undiagnosed heart arrhythmia. It was stress-induced. During the week of separation, the dog's heart had been throwing dangerous, erratic rhythms. He had been on the verge of cardiac arrest. "Since they've been reunited," Elias said, tapping the current chart, "Milo's heart rhythm has normalized completely. No medication, just the cat." The science was baffling, but the conclusion was inescapable. Bone Digger's presence calmed the dog's heart. Milo's presence strengthened the cat's bones. They were literally keeping each other alive. It wasn't just companionship. It was a symbiotic biological regulation. They were each other's pacemaker and crutch. Henderson lowered his tablet. He looked at the two animals. Milo was currently cleaning the inside of Bone Digger's ear while the bobcat eyes were half closed in ecstasy. The bureaucrat sighed, a long, defeated exhale that sounded suspiciously like relief. "I can't authorize a mixed species enclosure," Henderson said, pulling a pen from his pocket. He began to write on a paper form, bypassing the digital checkboxes. "However, I can authorize a specialized therapeutic support animal for a resident with high-needs disability." He handed the paper to Elias. Under the column for medical necessity, Henderson had written, "Intervention required for survival. Non-negotiable." "Keep the dog in there," Henderson grunted, turning to leave. "And maybe get them a bigger heated bed. Winter is coming." The years that followed were a gift. They were the bonus rounds of life that neither animal should have had. Bone Digger and Milo became legends, not just in the sanctuary, but to the millions who saw their story online. But they never knew they were famous. They only knew they were together. As they both entered their twilight years, the dynamic shifted slightly. Bone Digger, whose mobility naturally worsened with age, moved less. Milo, whose muzzle was now entirely white, didn't run as much. Instead, they mastered the art of stillness. On winter evenings, Elias would go out to check on them. The Oklahoma sky would be a vast dome of indigo stars, the air biting and cold. Inside their heated enclosure, under the glow of a heat lamp, the two friends would be asleep. It was a tangle of limbs that made it hard to tell where the dog ended and the wild cat began. They breathed in unison. If Milo twitched in a dream, Bone Digger would instinctively shift to comfort him. If Bone Digger's joints ached, Milo would press his warm body harder against the cat's side, acting as a living heating pad. Elias would stand there, his breath clouding in the air, feeling a profound sense of peace. He realized that he had spent his life studying nature, trying to understand the rules of the wild. Eat or be eaten, fight or flight, survival of the fittest. But looking at Bone Digger and Milo, he understood that he had missed the most important rule of all. It was the rule that bridged the gap between the tame and the feral, the predator and the prey, the broken and the whole. In the end, we are all just looking for someone to share the dark with. We are all looking for the heartbeat that syncs with our own. Bone Digger, the bobcat who couldn't walk, and Milo, the dog who wouldn't leave, had found it. And as the wind howled across the plains, they slept on, warm, safe, and entirely, perfectly together. The gate was locked for the night, but inside, they were free.